Welcome back to episode 34, part 3 of Talking Prisoner, interview with Drouyn. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, please go back and watch it. Then you'll understand what's happening here. You've officially broken the record, Coral, so welcome back. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you. God, the girl can talk. Hi, Ken. Looking very dapper as always.
Thank you.
Matt, you look like a slob. You've already publicised Talking Prisoner enough.
There we go.
Cover that. Yeah, well, okay. Okay, I'll let you get away with it.
I had a jacket on last time. All right, so this episode is all the fan questions that we didn't get to ask in the part 2,
Sure.
but there is also a few questions that we did miss that I would just like to quickly touch on before we start.
Okay, great. Go for it.
Okay, so the episode 399, which was written by you, the death of Hazel Kent, which was a really sad episode. Where did the idea come of that episode?
There was a lot of talk about euthanasia at that time, which was, what would it have been, 83, 84? And there was a lot of talk about introducing bills into Parliament. Now, it was something that I felt really strongly about, that, you know, people shouldn't have to die in agony if there's an easier way to go. And I still feel that way. And also, there was a lot of talk on a purely practical side that we needed to get Judy back in prison because she was too isolated from all the other characters. So, you know, she was only able to interact with people who had been released, and we wanted her to be able to interact within the prison walls. So they said, can you come up with an idea that will give us the chance to put her back in prison? But I didn't want her to, because I had such a soft spot for Judy. I loved Judy as a character. And of course, I loved Betty as a woman. I didn't want her to commit some robbery or crime that would put her back in prison. I wanted it to be a soft crime, if you will, but as is my normal want, I wanted it to be contentious. I wanted people to talk about it. So they were a bit iffy, I must be honest. Grundy's was a little bit, ooh, euthanasia, let's not touch it. I have to say, it is still my favorite realization of a story. It's not necessarily the best story I ever did, but it was the best realized story in that both Belinda Davie and Judy were Betty were absolutely brilliant in it. And it is my favorite, that episode is my favorite episode that I ever wrote for anything in all my career. That's my favorite. And I don't know if I might have told you this, Matt, but I used to write in longhand, and my partner at the time, Tony Drouyn, who was a very fast typist, used to type everything up. So I used to write sitting at the dining table on great big foolscap jotters and then hand pages to him. Wow. And my girls, who were about 15 or 16 at the time, about 16 and 13, they came in to find me absolutely sobbing at the table, tears running everywhere, all over the foolscap pages and making the ink run and everything, and inconsolable. And my partner then came in and said, what's happened, what's happened, what's happened? And I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and then looked up and said, Judy's killing Hazel, which of course the rest of them could not quite get why I was so. The amount of times I hear over the years, they're just characters. Well, they weren't to me, they were family. And yeah. I love that story. I love that scene. I think that moment where, and it's funny because, as you will have realized, there are a lot of scenes I don't remember at all. Yep. But I always remember Judy brushing Hazel's hair and Hazel grabbing her hand and saying, you're going to do it, aren't you, Jude? And that just really chokes me up even now. Yeah. They played it so beautifully, and I love that story to bits. I absolutely am so proud of that story. Didn't change anything. We still haven't got legal euthanasia, but
I was about to say that, like they're talking about in 83, but it just got passed here. Was it last year?
Yeah. In some states, but
Yeah.
not federally. It's still not passed federally. It's been passed in some states, one of which being Victoria. So it just shows, again, it shows how far ahead of its time the show was in what it tackled. No show at that time in 1983 tackled those things. They just didn't. They were just forbidden. They were off the table as subjects for entertainment. But you know, television's a great medium in that it's also a medium of information. So if you can show the human side of something which otherwise would just be, you know, words on a bill or talked about in political terms, then it should do some good. And I know it has done a lot of good, because I got feedback from people who said, you know, I never thought of it like that, of being an act of mercy, of being a good thing you could do to a friend would be to let them go. Because we're also selfish about death. We don't want people to die because we don't want to lose them. You know, we're really, really selfish about that. Whereas if we really love people who are suffering agony and are going to die horrendous deaths, we'd say, let them go. I had to put my special cat down a couple of years ago, and it broke my heart, but it was something that had to be done because I loved him. So the vet said, oh, you don't want to stay with him? And I said, yes, I do. He's going to wonder what's happening to him. And if I'm holding him and cuddling him, he won't be afraid. So I have very strong feelings about that. And one of the things I'm eternally grateful to Grundy's for is that because they let me have such free reign, I got to do stories that I would probably never have been allowed to do on any other show at any time. I would have been locked into a formula, and you know, you can't do this, you can't say that. But they were incredibly good with me in that they knew if I felt strongly about it, they'd let me run with the story. I mean, there were times when they'd take an entire story out for whatever reason after we'd shot it, but they always let me run with the stories that I believed in.
Yeah.
So that episode, thank you for bringing it up. What number was it? 399.
399, yeah.
399. I'll try to look that one up on streaming, because I don't have any of my eps on video, which I know sounds ridiculous because most people do, but I don't have any, and I am so proud of that ep. So although maybe if I watched it, I thought, oh, what a load of crap that was. I should have written it differently.
Yeah. And did you discuss it with Betty at the time, how you were going to bring her back into the prison? That was
we did discuss bringing her back into the prison, and she sort of said at the time, oh God, here we go again. And you know, I did say to her, it's not going to be you committing a crime. It's not. It's going to be you doing an absolute, because she knows she will go back to prison. She knows when she does it, well, that's it. That's the end of my freedom. And I said, everyone is going to feel sympathy for you. And she said, well, that's okay then. I just don't want to, you know, lose my temper and hit somebody or get involved in a robbery or be a victim of something. And I said, no, you make the choice. You make the choice out of love for Hazel. You make the choice to go back to prison. I'm very big on moral dilemmas, Matt, Ken. You probably will have noticed that. I never like straightforward stories where there are no choices. I like the story where the main character has a choice between going this way or going that way. And it's up to them which choice they take. It's never up to me. It's up to the character. What would the character do? But they're so much more interesting when you say, oh my God, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. You know, either way, it's going to work out badly. Which way are they going to go? And I always felt that Judy was essentially a good person as a person. And I used to say that to people who say, oh, you portray lesbians badly with The Freak, you know, I'd say, but, you know, you've forgotten that Judy is also a lesbian, and we portray her as a very sympathetic character, which we did. But I love moral dilemmas. They're what make me tick over. I love movies that have moral dilemmas, you know, straightforward stories or whodunits where you're just waiting to find out at the end whether they catch the baddie or not. don't do it for me. But whether someone has to help the baddie because the baddie isn't really a baddie and the baddies are really the guys who look like the goodies, and moral dilemmas, I love those. So that was a true moral dilemma, and I think it was an important story at the time. And I think it's time someone else did an important story like that. I get a little bit sick. I mean, it's all politics now. It's, if you have stories that are deep and meaningful, they're usually linked to politics. And great series just been on called Total Control with a wonderful Indigenous actress, Deborah Mailman. And that's all about, finding Black power for Indigenous people and finding some equality for Indigenous people, because whether we like it or not, we're all slightly racist. And that's great. But the personal thing of whether or not you actually commit a crime, albeit a compassionate one, and get yourself put in prison for love of someone else, because it's the right thing to do. I love those stories. I love that story. It's my favorite. I love the Kate Peterson story for the drama, and when she goes mad and says there's a clock inside my head going tick, 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 tick. She is truly nutty at that stage, and I love that. But the Hazel Kent, Killing of Hazel Kent story is my favorite story and script of any show I have ever done, and I've written for about 8 or 9 different shows. So that's saying a lot when you have an absolute favorite amongst all of those. That's my favorite.
It's funny you just mentioned about a loved one putting themselves in jail. I watched that new show on Channel 9, the Australian Behind Bars, where they've gone inside.
Oh yeah.
And last week there was a guy on there that he was a dad. He put himself in there so he could be closer to his son, who was in there for 6 months. It was
brilliant.
Yeah, like he was just so worried about his son and committed.
Brilliant. We should have done that story. We should have had Lexi's mum or somebody got herself put in prison so she could keep an eye on her. Yeah. That would have been great. I'm a bugger.
There you go. It's an idea for you. And lastly, now your exit from prison. Did you leave? What happened? Like, did you?
Okay, I knew someone would bring this up. All right,
I'm bringing it up.
Shut up. I am going to tell the absolute true story now, which some people are not going to like. Just because we would get days when it would be hard work, more than hard work. One of my story team wrote a poem, and it was, as Australian viewers will know, English won't know so much, there is virtually a national poem by Dorothy McKellar called I Love a Sunburnt Country. And one of my storyliners, just to release the stress, wrote this poem, I Love a Sunburnt Grundy. And it had things in it like, I love his mindless game shows, the calls to come on down from idiotic compares and painted Grundy clowns. And I thought it was funny. It was a joke. It was a stress reliever. I thought it was a joke. So I circulated it through the prisoner office. Now, as it happened, at that time we were in the Honeywell building in Richmond, which had several floors, and prisoner was on the ground floor, had the whole of the ground floor, and The Price is Right, which of course is the call to come on down, their offices were upstairs on the top floor. And as it happened, somebody from the lower floor took the poem to the top floor, and timing is everything in life. It was the day that The Price is Right was axed. And they were all thrown out of work. So they forwarded the poem, which had no name on it. They forwarded the poem to Grundy's head office. And the last verse of it went, I love a sunburnt Grundy, a man of leaking brains, still sunbaking in can't remember where it was, away from Melbourne's rains. Anyway, they sent it to the hierarchy in Sydney, and the hierarchy then sent it on to Reg Grundy. And they then subsequently contacted Mari Trevor, who was our producer at the time, to ask her to find out who wrote the poem and fire them immediately.
Wow.
And she called me in and she said who wrote it, and I told her who wrote it. And she said, oh shit, what can we do to protect them? Is there any way we can protect them? And I said, no. And, you know, they're really bright, and this is going to mean the end of their career, you know, before it's even really got started. And she said, well, there's got to be something we can do. And I said, well, I will take the blame. I will say I wrote it, and they're not going to fire me, because they'd already told me they wouldn't make me a producer, because they said we can get producers from anywhere, but we can't get someone to create content from anywhere. So I said they won't fire me. So I owned up and said I'm terribly sorry, and wrote a letter of apology to the Price is Right people, and wrote a letter of apology to Reg Grundy himself, and wrote a letter of apology to the hierarchy, apologized. And we thought that was the end of it. And Mari said, you know, thank God, that's great. We don't actually have to fire anyone. Next thing I know, I get a call from Reg Watson, and he was clearly upset and distressed about something. And I said, what's the matter? I thought he was going to say, we know you didn't write it. Obviously, it's not well enough written for you. But he didn't. He said, they want you out. They want you gone. And I said, what? He said, they want you gone, and they want you gone by 5 o'clock this afternoon, or they will send security to escort you from the building. I was in shock. I mean, that was like saying we're taking your child away from you, and you'll never see it again. And I said, but, you know, surely they've got some sense of humor. All right, it was a little bit insulting, I suppose, but it wasn't like it was, there were no bad words in it, for God's sake. Sure enough, at 5 o'clock, I went and told my story department. I had four storyliners at the time. I went and told my story department that I had been fired. And the person who wrote it said, well, I'll go and tell them. And I said, no, the truth. And I said, no, you won't. I said, if you really want to do something for me, you stay here and you become as good as you can possibly be. They all said, oh, well, we'll go out on strike. And again, I said, oh, no, you won't. Because if you go out on strike, that will be a black mark against all of you. And the damage is now done. So it took a while, but I was blacklisted in the industry for 2 years because Grundy's made it public, and I could not get a job for 2 years after I was fired from Prisoner. It was like, oh God, she's troubled, she did this, blah, blah, blah. But I don't regret it. It was, you know, it was the right thing to do, was to take the blame for it. And the person who actually did write it has gone on to do great, great things, which they wouldn't have been able to do had they been fired on their very first job. They would never have worked again. And I was so confident that that I was irreplaceable, that, you know, it never occurred to me they would fire me, but they did. But the follow through was that it took 6 months. You remember, Ken, it took about 8 weeks from a scripting to get to shooting. And then it was about another 3 months or so before it went to air. So it took 6 months for the new stuff to go to air. There was still 6 months of my stories and my characters, etc., going to air. And the week after the new stuff started going to air, the ratings, even though the people watching had no idea who I was or what I did, nor did they ever know who actually creates shows or what they did, even though the stalwart fans noticed there's something different, there's something odd. And we dropped from being the highest rating drama show at the time, because this is, remember, going to air at the time I left was around about the mid 500s, the mid to late 500s. And it got to the early 600s or 600 on. As soon as they went to air, the ratings dropped through the floor. Now, I know there are a lot of people, especially younger people, who loved that last year, from 600 to 692, which I have never, ever seen. So I can't really comment on one or the other. No, I've never watched it.
Wow.
I never watched it. Not from the day I left have I ever seen an episode of Prisoner. Not even my own stuff. Not since the day I left. Too painful. I mean, it's 40 years ago now, nearly, and it's still too painful. It's too painful for me. It is like, it was truly like the loss of a child. I mean, probably people would say extremely unhealthy to be that obsessed with a show that, and I still am incredibly defensive. Somebody says something against one of the characters or whatever, and I will bite back and say, you know, what the fuck would you know? Because I'm so defensive about it. But immediately my stuff stopped going to air, the ratings dropped, and Channel 10 cancelled the show. Immediately. It was in 3 weeks, within 3 weeks of my stuff going, stopped going to air, that they cancelled the show. But they had to play out the rest of the contract. And of course, Bevan Lee came down and took over from me, and then Alison Marcel came in for a little while at the very end, and they got the ratings back up, and in fact got a lot of new audience for the Rita the Beta stuff and Joan being put in prison, etc. They got the ratings back up to almost where they were, and a lot of people prefer that last year because it was a lot more straightforward prison drama. There was not the amount of emotional or psychological stuff going on. A lot of people prefer that, and that's their right to prefer it. I would not have done it that way, and you know, I have a very particular way of storytelling, and you either love it or you don't. If you love it, you're a fan and you follow me from show to show. If you don't like it, you say, oh, it's her again, I'm not going to watch that. And that's okay too. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. And I said recently to my daughter, I'm not, I think I was telling her that I had said it to you at the last interview. I am not a great writer. I'm a really good writer, but I'm not a great writer, not like the Andrew Knights and other great Australian writers. Jan Sardi and people like that. But I am a great storyteller and story creator. That's my strength, is not so much the writing as the creating of stories and characters. That's my forte. And, you know, they fired me and they lost a show. I could have kept that show going for 3-4 more years. So who had the last laugh? I don't know. It broke my heart. And as I say, they blacklisted me. No other company would touch me for 2 years. So I was out of work for 2 years. And the Writers Guild listed a list of what writers were earning, because the average Australian writer at the time was earning about between $25,000 and $40,000 a year. This is in 1984, 85. And they put in their report, however, one of our members went from earning $250,000, which was a lot of money nearly 40 years ago, still is. But one of our writers went from earning $250,000 last year to $12,500 this year. And that was me.
Wow.
But I'd do the same thing again. I would, you know, I had writers ring me up and say, why do you do this? Why do you buck the system? Why don't you just do what they want you to do? And, you know, and I said, I can't, you know, I can't. I've tried, I can't.
Do you still
Now,
speak to the person you took the fall for?
Pardon?
You still speak to the person you took the fall for? You still friends?
The person I took the fall for is
poem.
now one of the top script producers in New Zealand, in Australia, New Zealand, and overseas, and it's my daughter, Kelly Lefevre.
Oh, well, okay. Wow.
But it wasn't because she was my daughter that I took the fall. It wasn't. It was because I was the one who circulated the poem. She didn't circulate it. I circulated it. She was in her first job, and it would have meant the end of her career. Wow. And it's proven worthwhile because she has gone on to become such a force within the industry. I mean, you know, and so she proved me right. She proved that it was the right thing to do. It was not because, oh, I'm protecting my daughter. I mean, Murray Trevor said, what can we do to protect the kid? She was 18 years old. In her first job, and she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and there was no way I was going to let her lose a potential career for something which I had circulated. So I still speak to her. Yeah, I do. Everybody, if you've got Acorn TV, watch Under the Vines. That's her latest show, and it's an absolute delight.
We'll check it out for sure. Wow, amazing story. All right, Ken, over to you.
What, with fan questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's still reeling from the revelations, aren't you, Ken?
Oh, yeah, it blew me away. It was.
I'm still reeling from a couple of things. I remember working on The First Price is Right, which was done at Channel 7 with Hori Dargi comparing it. And
That's right.
The second one happened at Channel O that I worked on with Gary Meadows comparing. And so you took me back down the path of come on down, but also a first for Talking Prisoner about the scoop of knowing who this person was that you took the fall for. So thank you for that, and thank your daughter.
It's pretty well known in the industry now, so I hope she won't be too cross with me for making it public. But yes, it is a scoop in that respect because it's never been made public before.
Wow.
And I also think that Murray Trevor would have been on your side because of Peppy and mother-daughter. She was totally. I mean, her words were, okay, what do we do to save the kid? What do we do? And I said, well, the only thing we can do is I'll take the fall. They can't fire me.
Yeah.
So I had a tough 2 years after that. And in fact, I had said after that, I won't do any more television. But then I got a chance to do some kids television, you know, like Chuck Finn and things like that. And because it was so totally different, I took it and sort of had a breather from doing heavy full-on drama, which was starting to get to me. If Reg was depressed after 2 episodes, imagine how depressed I was after 4 years.
I'm going to throw a question at you. Let's say 12 months after you were sacked and they wanted to get the ratings back up and they go back to you, please come back. Would you have gone back?
Of course I would.
Yeah.
Of course I would have gone back. And I would have, I mean, when I quit during, I think, 1983, and I was off the show for about 3 months, and Lex Van Os, and again, I resigned then. I threw a tanty and spit the dummy and said, well, that's it, I resigned. And Lex Van Os, who was one of our producers who didn't like me, said, fine, goodbye. They had a leaving party for me and I was crying because I didn't really want to go. 3 months later, after they'd had Ray Colley and Betty Quinn doing my job, I always was quite pleased that it took two people to do my job. But he said, I need a story editor, which is what we were called in those days. I need a story editor. Are you interested in the job? So he came to me. It's like if they had come to me, yes, I would. I would have taken the high moral ground and the money.
And the money.
And said, yes, of course I'll come back. I didn't want the show to end. I mean, I had really, really mixed emotions about it because I think it was Kelly who rang me and said, guess what? We've been cancelled. And my feelings were elation, like, well, to you, and absolute terrible sadness at the fact that, you know, the show was going to end, and it was going to end quite quickly. That was how the whole Joan story came about. It was like, shit, we've only got a limited amount of episodes. I think they had something like, it was from about, they had from 650 to 692 in which to really wrap up the stories of everybody, you know, but especially give Joan her comeuppance. And that might sound like a lot, but when you remember it's 40 episodes, but it's 2 episodes a week. So it's 20 weeks they had, which is not a long time when you've got long running arcs and a lot of characters. It's not a long time. So for the people who say, oh, you know, it was all wound up too quickly, and, you know, I think it would have been better if we'd seen this and we'd seen that and everything. Sure, it would have been, but they did not have the time. They did what they could in the amount of time that they had left.
Yeah. You know who I always felt sorry for on the last episode was the last inmate that was brought in 5 minutes before the show.
Yes, yes.
I thought you got 5 minutes of fame, literally. On
Yeah.
I
was on Prisoner. What episode? The last segment of 692.
Crazy.
Right. Okay. Fan questions.
Yeah, Janice Robertson, who hails from Inverness in the Highlands of Scotland.
Wow.
Says was there any other TV shows that you wish you could have worked on?
That's really interesting. Not at the time, no. I was writing for the Restless Years, I think, because there wasn't a vacancy on Prisoner, waiting for a vacancy to come on the writers list on Prisoner. And like, you know, the Restless Years was not me in any shape or form. The only show I would have loved to have written, there's several American shows I would love to have written for. I'm a huge fan of both David E. Kelly and Aaron Sorkin. Yeah. So I would have loved to have written for any David E. Kelly show, any show at all. And I would love to have written for The West Wing. I would absolutely have killed to. In fact, that's where I got interested in American politics, was watching The West Wing. West Wing's probably the only series ever that I've watched 3 times all the way through. Not normally. Oh, was there anything? The only other show at the time would have been, but they were also very much later, of course. The only show at the time, but it wasn't an Australian show, was St. Elsewhere. I don't know if either of you remember St. Elsewhere. Was a hospital show, an American hospital show, and I loved that, and I would have liked to have written for that. The only Australian show I would have really loved to have written for, well, 2 actually. One was Kelly's, which was Something in the Air, because it was a little bit offbeat, and Rake. I thought the first
Rake, yes.
The first 3 to 4 series of Rake, and the awful thing was I never got a call to have a gig on Rake, but Rake was so up my street. It was so outrageous. It was so up my street. I could have done a great job.
I can imagine you doing Rake.
Yeah, I could have done Rake. I think they lost it completely when they sent him to Canberra.
Yeah.
And that last series was.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm still a huge Andrew Knight fan. There are a lot of good writers in Australia. We're better than mostly we think we are. There are a lot of good writers in Australia, but the only 2 people whose writing in Australia I am truly a fan of is Andrew Knight and Kelly Lefevre. I'm fans of both their work. One, obviously, because she was trained by me and I'm, narcissistic enough to want to say, ooh, I made that. But Andrew Knight's just a fantastic writer and I really do adore his work. But Rake is the only other Australian show I would have liked to have worked on.
Amazing. Can I go off topic for a minute? I'm sure you probably know this story, Coral, but going back to David E. Kelly, I mean, he got his start. He was a lawyer at the time and he was bored with working as a lawyer. So he started writing episodes of The Practice between court cases, but he was the only writer at the time to ever have two shows go up against each other on the same network. He had Ally McBeal and The Practice up against each other. I mean, he's just an amazing.
Astonishing, absolutely astonishing talent. Really, I'm not sure. I remember Bevan Lee telling me about him going to LA and he was granted an audience with David E. Kelly. And David E. Kelly was sitting in a chair with a hairdresser doing his hair and a manicurist doing his nails. And David E. Kelly said to him, well, what is it exactly you do? You're with the 7 Network, one of our shows is on the 7 Network. What exactly do you do, Bevan? And Bevan said to him, well, actually, in Australia, I'm you. That's why I said in the first one we did, Bevan, you are not David E. Kelly. Incredibly prolific mind and wrote virtually no big print in his scripts. No big print. Never told the actors how to play anything, but I mean, he had superb casts.
Yeah.
He said it's all there in the lines. I got to trust them to get it.
And he wrote everything on a legal notepad. Every
well, that's and I wrote on a full scat, but which I still have many of. I don't have them to hand. I probably will before the end of the day. I still have many of those which I scribble down ideas on because I still write down ideas. I think, great ideas. Like for example, we just got with our Foxtel, they gave us an upgrade on the remote. So it's a remote that works like Siri. You talk to it.
Oh, the voice. Yeah, we got that.
Yeah, the voice activated one. And so Beloved came up with the idea that someone who was being murdered happened to say the name of the murderer and the voice activator picked it up. So then I spent days working out an idea for how this would actually work, because it's been done with mobiles, of course, but the idea of somebody watching television and just pressing the voice activation button and saying the name of the murderer just seemed to me to be, really good, because it would be there on the hard drive and you'd be able to access it.
Definitely. Wow.
So next question.
Yeah, Stuart Carey said, if an actor or actress leaving the show, was there an actor or actress ever leaving the show ever disappointed her as she felt that she had storylines left for? So they...
I'm sure most of them felt that way when they were written out. The fact is that what actors think are good storylines are not necessarily good storylines. And there are two kinds of stories, Matt. There are, because I know you're interested in this kind of the techniques of writing, and hopefully some of the viewers are too. But there are two kinds of stories. There are stories which I call onion skin stories. They are exploding stories. You start off with one layer and it just blows. First layer off, there's another layer. Second layer off, there's another layer. Then there are stories which are imploding stories, which are like an egg. You go like that and it's done. It's broken. And there's really nothing more to be got out of it. And an example of that is the story that we had, a story I inherited on Home and Away, where Leah's baby son is deaf and he has a cochlear ear transplant. And another very fine young writer, Fiona Kelly, was the story editor, script producer at the time when I took over. And I said to her, that's an imploding story. We get great value out of it whilst we find out he's deaf, and he gets the cochlear ear transplant. But what do you do for the next 10 years? What do you do? I mean, you've got to put a fake cochlear ear transplant on the kid's head, which he kept pulling off all the time. So we had to put a beanie over the top of it to make him keep it on. And there's no story except to say, well, you can't even say he's deaf because with the implant he can hear.
Yeah.
So I said, that's an imploding story. It's a story which is great for a limited amount of episodes, but then you've got nowhere to go. And what you want in ongoing drama are the stories which you can keep peeling off another layer and saying, holy shit, I wasn't expecting that. And that leads you into another 6 weeks of story. And then there's another layer to peel off and you've got another 6 weeks of story. The last thing you want to do is to have to write out characters and writing new ones. So the only reason, and I don't think there was, apart from the people who came to us and said, look, I only ever said I would do 6 months. I think Carol Skinner was one of those. I only ever said I would do 6 months. 6 months is up. I really don't want to. I'll maybe come back somewhere down the track, but right now I don't want to be in a long-running television show. And then we would write them out. Otherwise, the only reason we ever wrote people out is because, one, they just weren't working. They weren't generating story for us. You can't keep bringing in guests and hoping that the guests will generate the story and all our regulars will do is react to it. I mean, you need to have stories in which the reaction creates a story of its own, so that the story is started by somebody from the outside, but it's continued or it's owned then by a person on the inside. And you get stories which you think will do that, but they don't do that. And the famous one, of course, which I always tell people about when I'm doing classes, is Daphne finds a gun. Now,
yeah,
these days, that would be, if you've seen, shows like Eli Stone and a lot of the quirky American shows, they do episodes like this. They do episodes which are musicals for no reason whatsoever. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a musical. But I said, okay, here's a jump off point for this story, and it's going to be huge. Daphne's digging in the garden and she finds a gun. What's she going to do with it? And all the storyliners came up with various ideas. We'd gone through a whole day of plotting this episode, and I said, you know what? This is a non-story, because whoever's found with that gun, all right, it's going to get them into trouble, but we know that. So the audience is 2 steps ahead of us. And I don't know if you remember this, but at the end of the episode, she just puts it back. She buries it again. So it was this very abstract kind of episode where the gun was passed from person to person, and then the finish ends back with Daphne. It's like it's come full circle. So these days we would call it a day in the life of a gun. But they didn't do stories like that 40 years ago. It was a weird one-off, and in the end I had thought we were going to get a lot of story out of it, and I was wrong. There were times when I could be so far off the mark it wasn't funny, and I was totally wrong about that. It not only didn't generate story, but it stopped storytelling in its tracks while we had this bloody gun, because you had to follow the gun. You couldn't cut away to another story, because people would be saying, hang on a minute, so-and-so's got the gun, what are they doing with it? So we had to make the whole episode about this bloody gun, and in the finish it was decided, stick it back in the garden. Stick it back, because there's nothing we can do with it. It was a wrong move. In retrospect, it was quite an innovative episode, because no one had done episodes like that. People have done them since. And my very, very favorite show of all time, I don't know if you like this one, Matt, or you can, but one of my favorite television shows of all time is a show called Northern Exposure. Northern Exposure was my favorite, and they would do Kafka-esque things, like they had a flea talking in the bar, sitting in the bar getting drunk because his wife had just had 3,000 children or something, and he didn't know how he was going to support them. And there's this flea getting drunk and saying, it was very Kafkaesque with the cockroach, but there's this flea saying, you know, you think you got troubles, I got 3,000 babies, I don't know how. And I longed to do things like that, but it wasn't the climate in Australia to do that kind of storytelling. So the closest we came was the story of the gun.
David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, worked on Northern Exposure.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Do you know, to this day, I've never seen an episode of The Sopranos?
Oh, we've got to cut the interview.
I've got it on my watch list, but I have
one
never
of the
seen
greatest shows. I've interviewed a few cast members from it, and it's brilliant.
But it's really interesting because the other show I've only seen 3 or 4. I've seen 3 or 4 intermittent episodes of is Breaking Bad, which I absolutely hate. And so do several other writers.
Can I stop you for a minute?
Yeah.
All right, Breaking Bad, I watched it when it first came out. I couldn't stand it. The first 4 episodes, I was just like, I can't watch this anymore. My friend said, no, keep going. So I did, and then I couldn't stop. It was just...
But see, that's what networks and production companies rely on, is the fact that you will get hooked. But for me, when you've got a man who... I mean, it comes back to, it's kind of like the Judy story in a way, the moral dilemma story. How do I support my family? Okay, you can be a little bit sympathetic towards the fact that he's going to die and he wants to leave his family with something. But then in the later series, when he knows he's not going to die, but he still does it.
Oh, he loved it.
And that's terrible. That is morally irredeemable. And I'm all about redemption. That is morally irredeemable. He's just a bad bastard. Kill him. Get rid of him. I don't want to watch that.
It was conflicting, though. It was conflicting because you felt sorry for him in the first season. He's dying, lung cancer, never smoked. And then he changes where he loves what he loves being a drug dealer. He loves killing people.
I know, but what sort of redemption is that? He should have bloody died of lung cancer. Anyway, let's get back to the fan questions.
Sorry.
We'll have a private talk about that and about how important redemption is in story art.
Mickey C, this is a question, speaking of shows, this is a question about arcade.
Oh, now, wow.
He says, if you'd have been working on arcade in a behind the scenes capacity, what would you have done to try and ensure it wasn't a failure?
Okay, well, the first thing is I wouldn't have made the set the star. I mean, all anybody ever talked about in arcade was that set, which was a great tax loss for Rupert Murdoch. But people said, oh, but the set is this. Number 2, I would have spent more time in creating a Bible. There was no Bible. There was no Bible for that show. So nobody actually knew anything. They made it up as they went along. I would have done a proper Bible which showed who these people were. Characters were created just to see, can we fit every single stereotype in the world into the one soap? Let's have a skinny gym owner and a fat girl who works there and they fall in love. Let's have a would-be playboy but with a daughter in a wheelchair. Let's have a male model and let's have the Chinese family, and let's have a hint of incest. It was like, let us throw in as many cardboard cutouts. When you see Paula Ray Desmond and Peggy Mortimer playing one-dimensional cardboard cutouts, so-called comedy characters, and Anne Semler doing her thick Hungarian accent, darlings, oh, darlings. You know, this is Magda, 40 years older and considerably larger. It was crap from beginning to end, and I would have said, okay, we have an opportunity to show the people whose livelihood depends on being in these shops. I would have tackled things like, the developers putting up rents and not being able to afford to pay the rent. I knew someone who was in the business, but at one stage worked in as a cleaner, as an overnight cleaner, so that they were free to do extra bits and etc. in the daytime. And they were a cleaner in a major shopping centre. And of course, bookstores and everything used to leave their stacks of specials outside. Lots of the stores used to leave there because it was all locked up. Yeah. And so this person used to shove stuff down his pants and put them in the cleaning buckets and then you know, sell them. You know, so I would have done those things. How I would have done those kinds of stories which actually had moral dilemmas attached to them, rather than one-dimensional stories. The biggest disappointment to me, because when I think Coronation Street started when I was about 12 or 13, and I did watch Coronation Street, and Johnny White had come from Coronation Street, and so I thought that Johnny White was going to be this great white hope of you know, creating this soap opera. But the first thing he did was say, can we get out the old number 96 scripts and see what ones we can use? Well, that was total anathema to me, because I never looked at any other show to see what stories I could use. I would find out afterwards that I'd done a story which was very similar to something else, but I'd either take things from the news and adapt them, or they would be from my head. I never ever tried to copy another show, but Arcade actually had a thing of having the writers read the old 96 scripts, which is, you know, a terrible, but that show, and I have said it before, was always intended to be a tax loss. It was always intended to be canned and for them to lose money. It just would have helped if those of us who were doing it had known. But so the quick answer would have been better developed characters, stories which had real knock-on implications for other people, like, you know, the arcade being sold, and what are the new owners going to do about the rents, and how do we all fight this? Do we all close down for a week or whatever? So yeah, it would have been a very different show, and I think it would have worked because it was a unique concept. It was just a unique concept.
I still love
really
Arcade.
Pardon?
I still love Arcade. I got a soft spot for Arcade.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You've got a soft spot for Arcade.
I really like it, yeah. But you're right. It was, yeah. But it's funny about that tax write-off, because Crocodile Dundee was supposed to be a tax write-off as well. The band In Excess were told, invest in that movie because you'll be able to write it off.
Yeah, and instead they made squillions in profits.
Amazing.
I still think it's a very overrated film, but Paul Hogan is such a strong personality, Crocodile Dundee. Yeah. He is such a personality, such a strong personality, that, you know, he carried the film, and more power to him.
Yeah, true. Now, Martin Dugan, who's a massive fan of Prisoner and Talking Prisoner, also he's a massive fan of Raylene Pierce, Phyllis. Yeah. Now he's asking a question. He felt there was more storylines left for her character. Why was she hit over the head with a wooden horse? Whose idea was that?
I know Martin's actually asked me this personally.
Oh, has he?
And I said to him, I don't remember, but I'll think about it between now and when we do the podcast.
Okay.
And to be perfectly honest, I think now in retrospect that at that stage, because Raylene was only a bit player, she was only, you know, she was a small character who we brought in and used when we needed to. And if my memory is serving me right, I had made the decision to push Lou Kelly into a major role. When I first came on the show, Louise Siverson was an extra.
Yeah.
Then she became a 50, what we call a 50-worder, which means she cannot say more than, and you actually had to count them. She can't say more than 50 words in any episode. If she does, she's classed as a featured player. And I had seen her as an extra when I was just writing and saying, why don't you do something with this girl? Oh, you know, we don't think she could carry a role, but she's good to have for muscle power and stuff like that. And I had seen something in her, and I think it's why we've stayed friends to this day. I had seen something in her which said, they're wrong. She's really got something. This girl has really got something, and she looks different in that she's actually quite glamorous, even when she's trying to look, you know, daggy. She's quite glamorous, and she can act. And I could not carry two characters who were gonna. I never saw, and I loved Raylene Pierce's work. But I never saw Phyllis as a major character. But I did see Lou Kelly as a major character, and I couldn't afford to hold on to both.
Yeah, Phyllis was always seen as a sidekick to the big baddie.
She was always seen as a sidekick, but I never believed for a minute that she would come forward and actually introduce herself and be, I'm here, and be charismatic. And so it was, as far as I remember, and I would have to go back, and I don't intend to do that because I'm too old to sort through all the episodes. I'd have to go back and see if it coincides, if I'm right, and it coincides with the rise of Lou Kelly. But something just clicked one night when I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, I'm pretty sure that they're getting rid of her was because I wanted to build the Lou Kelly character. So it was nothing about her work, because I liked her work. I thought her work was really good, but I never saw her as anything more than a sidekick, or come in and do 50 words and then be written out again for a couple of episodes. And it's as simple as that. Yes, I could have created stories for her, but I think it was a better choice to create the stories for Lou.
And I will say to you, to your credit, 40 years or 41 years later, that character is still scary and still stands to the test of time. You know,
which one?
Lou Kelly, when she's doing the
Lou Kelly, yeah.
She's scary.
When I first saw her, she didn't even have a name. She did not have a name. And then somebody said, oh, there's an episode in which somebody refers to her as Lou. And I said, okay, but she didn't have a surname. And my surname when I was performing was Coral Kelly. Oh. So I called her Lou Kelly. Wow. And then I created a backstory for her so that and I thought, okay, I've got to incorporate everything we've seen of her, but I need to create a backstory. So if she's going to be a major character, we need to know where she comes from, etc., etc. And I thought she was a great addition to the pool of characters.
And you probably know this, but she's got a further backstory in Prisoner where she played a nurse in the early years.
Yes.
An episode as helping Lizzie.
Yeah.
And then a saleswoman in a camera shop when Carol...
Yeah, but she wasn't Lou Kelly.
No, she wasn't Lou Kelly.
It was the same actress.
Same actress.
The actress has a backstory. The character doesn't.
The actress, not the character. Yeah. Ken?
Jay Shaw says, asks, if you could see anyone you've worked with interviewed by Ken and Matt, who would you choose?
Well, of course, the obvious ones are no longer available to you. The Sheila, Betty,
Gerda.
I think Olivia Hamnet is deceased.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying that? So you can't do Kate. I can't do Colleen. All my favourites you can't do. However, no, you can't do them either because they did too. Oh my God, they're all. I wish I could give you a definitive answer to that. If you haven't interviewed Genevieve Lemon, have you interviewed Genevieve Lemon?
No, not yet, but she's on our...
Well, Genevieve would be great fun to interview because she has had such a diverse career. I mean, she's a great singer. She's done musicals. She starred in Billy Elliot. She's done movies. You know, she's. I've watched. There's a new Netflix series out called.
Oh, The Tourist. Was it The Tourist?
No, it's another one. It's newer than that. Pieces of Her.
Okay.
It's called Pieces of Her, and it's very, very new. It only hit Netflix about a week or so ago. And it stars Toni Collette and 2 or 3 Americans. And I'm watching it, and all of a sudden I said to Tony, bloody hell, I would have sworn that was Colin Firth playing that role, but it couldn't have been. And then about 4 scenes later, up pops Genevieve Lemon. And I said, well, I know I'm not imagining that. Is Genevieve Lemon doing a very good American accent? And it turns out that because of COVID in the States, the whole series was shot here.
Yeah.
And she's brilliant in it. Genevieve Lemon is brilliant in it. She's a woman dying of cancer and saying, I'm trying to get the money together to take my kids. Now, do I take them to Disneyland or Disney World? I can't. Now, if I take them to Disney World, they can do this and that. And the Toni Collette character says, well, you just shut the fuck up. You're dying. You're not taking them anywhere. You know, and Genevieve was wonderful. So Genevieve Lemon would be a great interview. She's not the person who will be top of my list for you to interview, but they are all gone. God bless them. And what wonderful women they were too. Definitely. Absolute gems, all of them.
Definitely. And if you're watching, Genevieve, please email us. We'd love to have you on. James Murphy. So this is just a comment, not a question. Thank you so much for creating so many fabulous characters and stories. We owe you a lot. Thanks and love from the UK.
It's when I get somebody say something like that, James, you have no idea how much that means to me, because the creators are the forgotten people. The people who, and we choose to do it. I mean, we choose not to be upfront, so we can't moan and bitch about it. It's that creatives have things to say, and creatives are not just people who create stories. I mean, some of them are directors, some of them are even producers. They're few and far between. Not very many creative producers around, but when you get a good one, they are great. But the people who do what myself and my peers do, we are compelled to tell stories. We can't not tell stories. When I was growing up, one of my favorite writers was an English writer called J.B. Priestley. And he wrote a wonderful book about the music halls of vaudeville called The Good Companions, which was made into an English film in the 50s. And somebody said to him, because he said, I write really from the time I get up until the time I can't write anymore. And somebody said to him, oh, you must love writing so much. And he said, I hate writing. I hate it. I would rather do anything else than write. And someone said, well, then why be a writer? And he said, because I have to. I have things to say. And how else am I going to say them to the world if I don't write them? Well, now, if you want to say something to the world, you do television. Because that's where the world audience is. You don't write books. There are people who've never read a book in their life, but they sure as hell have watched a television show. So for someone to actually acknowledge that our work is important is really, really special to me. And I thank James very, very much for that comment.
Is being a writer a lonely world? Is it lonely, being a writer?
Being a writer is unbelievably lonely. But you learn to live within your world. When I had this is going back to 2000, I think it would have been, I had what they call a trans-ischemic attack, which is a precursor to a full stroke.
Oh, wow. And
it was, I had been working on a children's show out of WA, but I'd been working in Melbourne where I lived, called Wildcat, which actually sold to America and has quite a big following in America. We did 2 series of it. I was, as most writers will tell you they are, I was in the world of that show when I was writing. I was actually writing this particular episode, which was the last episode of the first series. And the time span of that world within the episode, are you following me? Because I know this is, sometimes people think, what the hell is she talking about? The time frame of the world in the episode was about 8 hours. So as far as my brain was concerned, I had been working 8 hours. When I turned off the computer, I found I could not move my left arm. My hand was like a claw, like this. And I was talking out of one side of my mouth like this. I don't know if you've noticed that my smile is slightly lopsided. It goes down on this side. And I managed to dial my daughter and say, I think I've had a stroke.
Oh my God.
And the ambulance men came, and it was nighttime, and they took me off to the hospital. And the question they asked me was, do you know who you are? I said, yes, I'm Mrs. Sonia. Do you know what day it is? I said, yeah, it's Tuesday night. And they said, no, it's Thursday night. And I said, but it can't be. I thought I had worked from Tuesday morning to Tuesday night. And I had actually sat at the computer. I had actually wet myself and didn't realize I had done it. I had sat at the computer from Tuesday morning to Thursday night without food and without getting up to have a shower or change or go to the bathroom. And I had a mini stroke.
Wow.
That's that, you know, and that is how, if you are really, all right, I'll accept that I'm a little bit obsessive about the whole thing of character and storytelling, but real writers have no sense of space or time. They exist within the world which they're writing about. That's why I'm able to cry that Judy, who was a character, killed Hazel, who was another character. Broke my heart. But yes, it's a lonely, lonely world. And that is why I had this love-hate relationship with working in-house. Working in-house, you had, and being a script producer, you have all these admin responsibilities. Do the writers' lists, book the writers, ring up, check how they're going with their first drafts, liaise with all the other departments, etc., etc. And I hated admin with a vengeance, because it took me away from actually doing the creatives. You know, all I wanted to do was just tell the stories, but they weren't going to pay me the big bucks just to tell the stories. So in a way, I liked it much better when I was not in-house, when I was creating stories like the Kate Peterson story in point form and telling the whole story, and then let them divide it up however they wanted to. But the being in-house with other writers, with the storyline team, is the best, as they say, being in the room. Yep. We talk about it as working the room and being in the room. And it is the best thing in the entire world to have, to be with, regardless of where they're at in their development, 4 other writers who are your storyliners, because as I explained in the previous ep, the writers did not come in at all. They worked from scene breakdowns. But now writers do come in for episodes in the same way as they do in a writer's room in America. But being in the room with 4 other writers at varying degrees of their development is the best thing in the entire world. There is nothing that gives you such an adrenaline rush. There is nothing that is more satisfying. There is nothing which sends you out feeling more proud of yourself and your work, or more ashamed that you didn't nail the story and you didn't do justice to the characters. It is the best thing in the world, and I miss that even now, even though I know I am too old and I am no longer capable of doing what I used to do. I do know that. I recognize that.
Oh, you've got some stories left in you. You still.
I've got a lot of stories left in me, and I wish to Christ somebody would take me on as a consultant or something, and just let me have a Zoom meeting once a week with the room and come up with stories. But they don't work that way anymore. You know, I mean, Kelly talks about herself as, you know, she's considered the past generation of writers, and she's 50 odd. So I'm a freaking dinosaur at 77. You know, they just don't hire 77-year-old writers. So I would either have to create a show of my own and make sure it got sold. And the stuff I create of my own is not commercial enough to get sold. And I know that. I know it's not commercial enough, but I don't want to just do stuff that's really commercial.
Yeah.
I want to do something that's groundbreaking in the way that Prisoner was groundbreaking. So it's not going to happen. I still write. I write for, and it's on Facebook. So anyone who's on Facebook can still see my writing bits. I review plays and musicals for a magazine called Stage Whispers, and Stage Whispers is a print magazine and an online magazine. So I get to go to opening nights and I get to interview overseas stars. And I've got an interview coming up with Penn and Teller because they're coming to Australia and I love magic. So I'm going to do an article on magic in theatre and why we're all so attracted to it. So I still get to write, but television's, it's a very hard taskmaster. And mostly the people who are in positions of authority are not people that you would necessarily want in your life under any other circumstances. And I'm afraid that I am known for calling a spade or a dickhead, even if that dickhead happens to be the head of the network or something. So next question.
No, but it's true. There's a lot of those executives that sit in their office and they've got
suits.
No
we
idea.
call them the suits. Yeah. We call them the suits because they
yeah.
still, even in this day and age, wear a suit to work.
Yeah.
You know, you're working in media, you're working in television. Supposedly it's a creative medium, but you wear a suit.
Yeah.
That kills all creativity to start with. So,
Ken.
Is it Ken's turn or yours?
It's your turn, Matt.
Oh, I've got the next one. So I got two. Oh, lucky. Neil Foster. I would love to know what period of the show Coral considers to be the golden era, if any.
Okay, well, this is really interesting because there's been a lot of academic stuff written about Prisoner. I mean, I know at least 3 people who contacted me over the years and asked me for input who have actually done their doctorates.
Oh, okay.
You know, so they're PhDs in Prisoner. And they consider, and this is the intellectual crowd, that the golden era of the show was 83 through to beginning of 83 through to late 85, early 86, which is all of my period of time, of course. And it makes sense because that it's in itself was the time when the storytelling changed drastically, really. I mean, I only knew the one way to tell stories was to say, these are the characters, what would they do? And in fact, it's a well-known story in the industry that I kicked writers out of a room when we were plotting, when they said, well, what do we want them to do? And I said, get out. And they said, why? And I said, no one in my story room says, what do we want them to do? We figure out, we get inside their heads and figure out what they would do. And at the end of my book, which is some 30 odd years old now, but you can still get it printed on demand, big screen, small screen, the one thing I say to all new writers to put above their desks is, the characters do not know they are in a movie or a television show. They believe they are real people. And so they are not going to hold off on saying something to each other until it suits us as the writer for them to do so. They are living their lives and living their own truths. And we as observers get to pop in from time to time and see what's happening in their lives. But we don't see 100% of everything. I have people write to me and say, oh, when did so-and-so find out about such and such? And I say, when they were off screen. and you were watching two other characters do something else. That's when they found out about it. But the golden age for me probably was from the mid 300s to around 500. I would consider that my golden age of storytelling. That was when I was at my peak, when I had the chance to really nail the freak and show a different side of her with the Shane story. Yeah. When I had the last of Lizzie, and when I had the last of Val, so the last of B, and I had Myra coming in, and I had Pixie, and I had Judy with Hazel. So, you know, early 300s through to around 500. So I think those are the golden age of Prisoner. Now, that's just my opinion. And there are people who think that the first 100 and something episodes are the best, and they never ever watched it again. Interestingly, they are mostly men. They are mostly men who like that era best. And I think the reason why is because it was very simple, black and white storytelling. They were good or they were bad. They were going to get punched up or they were going to punch up. And it was easy to follow. Whereas mine was a far more cerebral type of storytelling, which is a female viewpoint. Women always want to know why. It's always women, well, I went to the pub with the guys, but why did you do that when you knew I'd cooked dinner? Because I wanted to see the guys. But why couldn't you ring them and invite them around on the weekend? You know, it is very true that women want to know why, men want to know what. But for me, I was at my peak. After 500, I started to not lose interest because I loved it till the end, but I started to think, I don't know how long I can do this. I don't know how much longer. Yeah. Average life for a showrunner, story editor is three years probably. And so I don't think I was at my best from the early 500s through to Rita and Eve Wilder. They were the last two characters I created. And I don't think that I was at my best with stories at that stage. I was still fine with characters, but I don't think I was at my best with story then. So for me, and the most enjoyable time was from about 300 to 500.
Okay. Yeah. Ken, as someone who was on it from episode 1 to episode 692, what was your golden era behind the scenes?
You're really putting me on the spot now, aren't you? Episode 1.
Episode 1.
Oh, good call, Ken. Good call. Good call. Because there had never been anything like it. Never. It broke the mold on television drama. And as I say, that's what made me want to write for television. I had no desire to write for television until I saw episode 1 of Prisoner. I saw Frankie in that. I saw the fact that there were women who looked daggy, and there was this lesbian crashing into the rec room, and I thought, I want to write that. Yeah. I don't want to do theatre or stage or anything anymore. I want to write that. Amazing. So that was, you know, more power to Denise Morgan, Ian Bradley, Reg Watson, all those people. If they had not created it and done that first 190, 200 odd eps, I would not have had the chance to take that baby and nurture it through its, you know, childhood.
Through puberty.
Through puberty, yes, yeah. So more power to them. And the last thing, and I didn't have a lot to do with Denise Morgan, but the last thing Denise Morgan said to me, she came in and she was still writing the odd episode, but she'd heard that I was taking over the show. And Dave Worthington had taken over from her, but Dave he was a bloke and he'd never got as invested emotionally. And Denise came in and she said to me, I know you'll take good care of my baby. And she really passed it to me when she heard I was it. And I am forever grateful for the opportunities to do that.
And everyone speaks so highly of Denise. Everyone we speak
to. Yeah, she's wonderful. She was, you know, really wonderful. And it was a tragedy that we lost her so young. Real tragedy.
Ken.
Bonnie Davis Shacko. Now, this is an interesting question. Were there any storylines for your prisoner actors that gave you insight and you made adjustments?
It doesn't often happen because, and who asked this? Bonnie? Was it Bonnie?
Bonnie, yes.
Bonnie, what happens is that the scripts are usually so far ahead of shooting the episodes that it doesn't often happen. And often that is to our detriment. I did not know that I could have had Rabbit singing all over the place. Because I didn't know that Genevieve was a musical theatre person as well as an actress. When I was doing Pacific Drive, what the hell was his name? Lloyd Morris, who played the baddie, Trey, I found out after I left that he played, or I think it was when I was leaving, that he played great piano. He was a great pianist. And I'd done, you know, 150 odd episodes with him and not known this about the actor. So the way of getting around that so we could have him play piano was to resurrect Brandy Laura and give him a split personality, one of which was a serial killer who played piano. So we actually got in him playing piano. But I did know the range of certain actors who I knew from before Prisoner. So I knew that I could give Myra stories which were funny stories, stories which were Earth Mother stories, stories which were full-on gritty drama stories, because I knew her capabilities. The same with Janet Andrew-Arthur. I knew that with Reb, I could do any kind of story because the actress could handle it. She was such a great actress. And of course, I did know about Betty's background with music. Yeah. And so I knew she played guitar and she played a bit of piano, and so we were able to utilize that. But unfortunately, mostly the characters were always created before they were cast. And by the time they were cast and by the time we got to see them, I got to see their audition scenes, but I didn't know enough about what their backgrounds were. It was too late to capitalize on things which we would happily have included had we known about them at the time, but we just didn't know about them. I mean, I would have loved to, I can't remember who it was, but one of our actresses signed. And had I known that she did, you know, deaf and dumb signing, I would have put in a profoundly deaf character who the only one she could talk to was this person who could sign. It would have been a good storyline, but I didn't know about it until, you know, years later. So it's one of the flaws in the system of how we created. But unfortunately, because of the time frame of how long it takes to come up with a story, storyline it, then do it into scene breakdown, then get the scene breakdowns to the writers, then get the first drafts in, then read the first drafts, then make amendments, then get that to the script editors for them to rewrite some scenes, then deal with the director saying, but I'd really like to shoot this. Okay, well, we'll move the location. And then, you know, amendments are added to the script in a variety of colors. I think ours was pink, blue, green, but I might be wrong. Now I think of it, I think there were yellow pages too. So, but I think pink were the first amendments. You know, it's such a long, drawn out process that finding out personal things you can use for the characters from the actors, it's time prohibitive. And that's a shame. That's a flaw in the system.
Yeah, definitely. Andrew Hill is asking now, Nora Flynn, who a lot of fans are divided that she was a great top dog and she was an awful top dog, couldn't carry it. But why did she just disappear? She was just gone.
She, if I'm correct, and I think I am, the powers that be did not like her.
Okay.
Now, I thought she had a bit, well, they just thought she was weak. She wasn't top dog. They had this vision of a top dog must be this, this, and this. And I said, but sometimes you can be quiet and you can still command authority and you can still give orders. The major thing the people around you have to know is that they can trust you and that you won't let them down. And I thought that Nora had all those things in potential, but Sonia, I don't think was the right person to play that role. I just don't think she was the right casting, and they did not like her. They thought she was quite weak. And if I'm correct, it was one of the first things that they did after I left was write her out. Did she leave around 600?
From memory, yeah, it was.
Yeah, the very first thing she did. She was the first person to go after I left. Having said that, I probably would have written her out. Contract was coming to an end, and I probably would have written her out because I just thought that you can be quiet and still be charismatic, but you can also be non-charismatic. And if you can't command a room, if you can't command 2 million people who are watching, then you're not the right person to play that role. And that, and even some of the comedy characters, and some of them that were completely over the top, like Pixie. You watched every scene Pixie was in. You watched, you were glued to it because she could command attention. Yeah. But Sonia did not have that kind of persona, and she worked really, really hard. And I was so anti her escaping to get pregnant story. I was so anti it. I thought, here's a group of gay men saying, well, women only have to sleep with a guy and they get pregnant. It's an insult to all the women who can't have children. I was furious with that story and I never wanted to do it. And then I think they realized, oh, shit, now we've got, a top dog who's pregnant and, we don't know what to do with her. And when I went, because you have to remember, I went in the middle of a week.
Yeah.
On the same day, we hadn't even finished plotting that week. And I was gone. And they were left, as I said last week, with no ongoing stories. I mean, my guys knew pretty much what I had planned for the following 2 or 3 weeks, but they weren't going to divulge it. They just sat there and said, okay, what are we doing this week then? But I think, it was a case of not 100% casting. Yes, the character had a lot more to give, but I don't believe that the actress did have a lot more to give. Yeah. I hope that answers that.
I really, I agree with you, but I think her character really stepped up in the terrorist episodes.
I did too.
She really became,
I did too. I mean, that was the case of, okay, I'll give her something to do.
Yeah.
That's more in keeping. I did too, but there was a limitation to how far you would go with her without blowing what she'd done in the first. Yes. I mean, people don't do a 180-degree switch, so there was a limitation.
Okay, Ken.
It's Michael Reeves asks, Coral, you're allowed one member of the cast or crew to take out to dinner. Who would it be and why?
Oh my God. I could more easily name people it wouldn't be, but even that would be a short list. Look, unfortunately, again, mostly gone. I would love to have, I tell you one person I would love to have really got to know on a personal level who I never did, and that was Gerda Nicholson, who played Anne Reynolds. She was a lovely, lovely lady. She was super, super smart. She knew theatre, which was always, until Prisoner, my very first love. She knew theatre backwards, forwards and inside out. I think she would have been great company, but I would have been happy to have had dinner with Mari Trevor at any time. Terrific lady. I would have loved to have sat down. I never met Sheila in a non-prisoner setting. Well, that's a lie. I met her at a prisoner gathering, and she had her cigarette in a long cigarette holder, and she was dialing that. And I thought, oh my God, this woman's just. I had not realized she was so different to her character, and she had great stories, which I heard that particular night. So I would have loved to have sat down and had dinner with her. But of the living people, probably not so much. Not so much, but I would have loved to have had, Sheila Florence, Maury Trevor, Gerda Nicholson. I would have loved to have sat down and had dinner, because I'm not one for big gatherings. I'm not a party person. I'm a dinner party person. Like 6 to 8 people for dinner who all have something small in common. So one binding thing, but lots of diversity as well. That's my idea of a good night out. So sorry, Michael, can't answer any better than that.
Just on those people you've mentioned, this is a question for probably both of you. Gerda Nicholson, Sheila Florence, and Maury Trevor, they passed away so long ago now. What do you think they would be thinking now if they were still here of the popularity of Prisoner still to this day?
I don't think they would believe it. I don't think any of us at the time foresaw generations who weren't born at the time we were filming. Do you agree, Ken? Whole generations of people who say, oh, I wasn't alive when it first showed, and I think this is incredible that these stories and these characters are still reaching people who weren't born when we created them. It just is crazy. Yeah. And I venture to say, and I've said this before, they will be extremely lucky with Wentworth if anyone remembers it in 40 years' time.
Yeah, but do you know
and it was a good show. It's a good show, yeah. A very good show.
But do you know the interesting thing about Wentworth, the thing about Wentworth that's attracted these new fans, they are now going, oh, this was based on an older show, so they're going back.
And they're now watching Prisoner, and they're and mostly they're saying they like Prisoner better. Now, when you look at Prisoner, okay, when you say you like Prisoner better to something which only does like 10 or 12 eps a year and has a fortune spent on it and has all the latest technology, etc., 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 and you realise that Prisoner had limited location, limited shooting capabilities. I mean, I think we had 4 camera mostly, didn't we, Ken, in studio, or 3?
3.
Only three cameras. Was shot on tape, not film. Had sets where the bars were broom handles, dowling. So, you could have pulled one out if you wanted to. May do without any real continuity, etc., etc., etc. What makes that show so great? There's only one thing it can be: the stories and the characters. It can't be anything else. It can only be the stories and the characters. It isn't, with due respect to Ken, the way it was shot, because they were locked into a formula of what they could shoot, how and when. So it comes back time and time again to, why is this show still so revered 40 years down the track? Sorry, folks, it's not Val Lehman, much as she would like to say it is, and the show was over when she left. It is the stories and the characters, and the kudos for that goes to people like Ian Bradley and Denise Morgan and Dave Worthington and myself and all my storyliners and all my writers. Those are the people who are responsible for Prisoner still being an icon show 40 years down the track. More than 40 years. It's 42, 43 years this year since that show started. And it's 40 years ago this year, or 41 this year. No, it's 40 years ago this year, late in the year since I took it over.
Amazing.
So, we must have done something right. And if that sounds big-headed and up myself, well, hey, guys, I will own that. I'm enormously proud of that work. Definitely. It's something when you can reach your late 70s and say, I did that, and people still remember it, and people still love it, and it still changed some people's lives. And of course I didn't do it alone. I had a team with me, and even some of the producers. Murray Trevor was never anything less than 100% supportive of any story that I wanted to do. John McRae, who had 2 stints as producer, was never ever less than 100% supportive. He would say, kid, he called me kid and I was older than him. He would say, kid, if you reckon that works, it works. That's not my expertise, so I'm not going to tell you how to suck oranges. If you say that works, it works. They were incredibly supportive. And that's why the show, we were all so completely invested. If I found there was a writer working on that show who did not 100% believe in those characters and the stories we were telling, I got rid of them. I got rid of them. I got storyliners for whom it was a job or a stepping stone. I got rid of them. I didn't want them there unless they were 100% committed to believing in it. I didn't want them. And I didn't want actors or actresses who thought they were bigger than the roles that were created for them, whether they were created by me or someone else. And it's why it's not a secret that I'm not a huge Val fan, but that's the reason why I'm not a huge Val fan. Because Val believes that Val Lehman made B. Smith. And the truth is that B. Smith made Val Lehman. That's the truth of it. That character, that role, made her a celebrity. It's not the other way around. And people don't realize that. A lot of people think that actors go on and they make up their own characters and they make up their own lines, and they don't realize how we sweat blood. There's a very famous English writer who I became friends with only because, and it's Jimmy McGovern, who wrote Cracker and many other great shows. And we only became fans because his mother was a huge Prisoner fan. And whenever we would go to visit her, she would be watching, they used to have Prisoner marathons apparently in some parts of England, and she would be watching the Prisoner marathons, and he would sit with her and watch it. And he said, what I know about storytelling, I learned from you and your teams on Prisoner. That's where I learned it. That's where I learned to tell stories, not on Corrie, because Corrie was going at the time, but they didn't tell those kinds of stories. They didn't take those kinds of chances. You know, yes, Reg took on within these walls and created something different in terms of a show about women in prison. But within these walls was about the admin more than anything else. And really and truly, for me, Prisoner really found its strides in the late 200s before I moved in-house, but round about the time we introduced the Freak, and we saw, and I wasn't responsible in any way for Chrissy Latham, but we saw Chrissy Latham pretending to be a lesbian and getting the Freak to massage her neck, and ooh, you know, oh, that feels so good, Miss Ferguson. And I thought, no one's ever seen this stuff before. This is absolutely wonderful. And the great Jimmy McGovern learned his storytelling from Prisoner. It is an icon. It deserved to be an icon. It deserved to be in the World Hall of Fame of television programs. Quite frankly, I honestly believe that. To tell you, know, the wonder is, people say, oh, the wonder is that you did 2 hours a week, which is the length of a feature film, and you shot it over 2 weeks, or 5 days, actually. I think it was over 2 weeks, wasn't it, Ken? 2 days location for the following week and 3 days in studio. So shot it over 5 days shooting, 2 hours, which is the equivalent of a feature film. It's not a wonder that we did it in such a short time. It's a bloody wonder that we did it at all. It's an absolute miracle that we did it at all. And it hasn't been done since. It's never been done since. Primetime drama, no show has ever shot 2 hours a week of prime time, world famous drama. Never been done. Prisoner is the only time. So I'm proud of it, as you can tell.
You should be. And everyone that worked on the show, cast, crew, everyone should be very, very proud.
Absolutely. Every single one, from the smallest prop boy to the directors, you know, the great directors who've gone on to do other things, and even the poor tragic directors like Kendall Flanagan. Absolute tragedy. You know, they all brought commitment, which is hard to find these days. And that's why there's so much crap television. You know, the good television. The good television is a television where everyone is 100% committed to the story and the characters. 100%. And that makes good television. Anything less than 100%, it's okay. Yeah, it passes the time.
Yeah.
But that's all it does.
Definitely. Keeping an eye on time. Darren
Yes,
Hemper,
I know.
said, where did she get the inspiration for Kate Peterson's tick, tick, tick solitary scene? As I think it was one of the best episodes ever written.
Thank you to that person. I'm very proud of that. And this is another personal insight. I had a grandmother who, I'm a 4th generation show business family. My daughter's a 5th generation show business family. And my grandmother was in show business playing theatres way back from the 1920s. And when my grandfather died, my grandmother and grandfather did a double act, and they were very, very close. And she was a social drinker before he died. When he died, she, like many people who were in codependent relationships, close codependent relationships, she went to pieces. She couldn't deal with it at all, and she became a hopeless alcoholic. And absolute, which is, I suspect that subconsciously it's one of the reasons why I don't drink unless it's a special occasion and someone puts a Prosecco in my hand, then I will drink it. But I think it's one of the reasons why I don't drink. She was a hopeless alcoholic. And I could remember as clearly as if it was yesterday, what happened was the alcohol, she was always a volatile person anyway, a very volatile personality. But the alcohol actually ate away part of her brain. And towards the end, when my poor mother had to have her committed, she had lost the plot completely. And I can remember being 8 years old, and as clearly as anything, she was a tiny, tiny woman, unlike me. She was 5 foot, just 5 foot tall, and weighed 100 pounds. That's how tiny she was. And she picked up a big theatrical trunk, which were your height because you hung the costumes in them on hangers. She picked up a huge theatrical trunk and threw it down a flight of stairs at the men in white coats who had come to take her away. And she said, and I remember, I was there with my mother, and I remember this, and will till my dying day. She stood at the top of the stairs with her eyes like this, going from side to side, saying, "It's the clock, you see, it's the clock, it's in my head, it's going tick, 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 in my head." And oh, I got goosebumps. Oh, sorry, got goosebumps remembering it. And I forgot it for 40 odd years. And then up came the Kate Peterson story. I came up with the Kate Peterson story. And I remembered that so clearly. And I could not think of anything that described it better than that. So that is why she had the wild eyes. I talked to Olivia about it. And Olivia knew the story. I told Olivia the story. I said, she cried. She said, "Oh my God, how am I going to play this? Now I know that story." And I said, "Well, you're not playing my grandmother. You're playing Kate Peterson just to play it as Kate would play it." But that's where the tick, tick, tick comes from.
Wow.
Comes from a real memory of my grandmother.
Wow. That's we're breaking all sorts of news here. That's
God, it's making me think I need to write a book. It's making me think I do need to write the book, because all the books written about prisoner are really, sorry, but they're really pretty crappy. And often they're from, like, if it's by an actress, whether it's Maggie or whether it's Val or whether it's Betty, it's just about their little part of it, really. It's not about the world of that. And I'm thinking maybe I should, you know, I've actually now got tears running down my mascara, because I haven't thought of that story about my grandmother since I did the Kay Peterson story, and it was very emotional doing that story. But I hope that satisfies that viewer, that they now, even my children do not know that story.
Wow.
I've never told that story to anybody except Olivia Hamnet.
Wow.
It's the only person who ever heard that story.
Wow.
And my grandmother died in an insane asylum.
Wow.
She could never be released.
Very sad.
That's my last memory of her completely. That's my very last memory of her.
Wow. You and Ian Bradley should collaborate on a book together.
Yeah, that'd be good.
History of Prisoner. There you go.
Yeah, that'd be good. However, having said that, I would probably talk 10 to 1 to poor Ian, because I remember Ian as a man of fairly few words, so I'm surprised you got an hour and a half out of him. But you're now
we got 3 hours.
About, God, 8 hours. We're coming up to 8 hours.
All right, Ken.
How many more questions?
There's only 3 or 4, I think. Not many.
Okay, good.
Andy Dolman says, fantastic getting Coral on here. I'd like to ask, did you ever have to change the direction of any characters once they were on screen?
No, I didn't have to change the direction of characters, but I did in some cases add extra dimensions. For example, when we did, which a lot of people think was really, really stupid, but when we did the Judy Bryant, the songwriting competition, because I knew that Betty was musical, I thought, well, there is nothing stopping Judy from being musical, so why not? But no, there was never a situation, because it would have been too late, Ken, as you know. If I changed it in storytelling, their early eps would have already gone to air, so we would already have established them as something, and then it would have meant changing direction. So while we added extra dimensions, extra things to their past, I mean, nobody knows the secrets I've shared today. Nobody, and I tell you, after last time when you wore your lilac tie and we talked about the Lilac Mafia, I received an email from one of the Lilac Mafia the following day and thought, oh shit, I'm still in touch, and oh shit, I was actually going to send you an email and say, can you edit this and take that out?
Oh.
No, it's fine. Hey. It goes away. So no, we didn't change, but we added to, because people are constantly growing, you know, and that's the thing about real life, is you can't change something which is fundamental to a person's personality, but you can have someone mellow with age, or you can have someone receptive to a different point of view, which may change their thinking about something. But no, I never changed anything fundamental to a character, but I gave them plenty of leeway to grow as they settled in. I mean, Myra was a very different person at the end of her run to what she was at the beginning of her run. I could not have done the love story with Jeff McRae, was his name, or the prisoner. I couldn't have, with Les. I could not have done that story with Myra late in her run, because she had moved past that stage of believing that there was a normal life and something out there for her. She'd moved past that. So yes, you allowed them to grow and give them extra, put extra in there for them to work with. But no, I never changed the direction of a character. If I had changed the direction of a character, it would have meant that I had failed in my job in the first place in creating.
Now, this next question is by a person called Alf Craven, which we don't know who he is, but he's taken the name of Ray Ma's character in Home and Away and Prisoner Craven. He did ask 7 questions, but we've shortened it down to 1.
Okay.
He said, what comment do you have to make about the actor, which was Lindy Davies, the Ruth Ballinger, objecting to the child pornography and child prostitution storyline in the Behind the Bars book, I think it was called?
Yeah. Well, of course, that's when they interviewed her many years after the fact. The fact is she never objected to the storyline at the time. Okay. Never. We said, is she happy with it? And we got no feedback that she was unhappy with it, and she did the story. It's fine afterwards that Lindy went on to do what I call far more critically acclaimed roles than her prisoner role would have been. And then as a critically acclaimed actress and someone is interviewing you and says, what do you think about so-and-so? They say, oh, I would never have done that had I known. But the fact is that at that stage, she was getting a name, but she wasn't a big name. And she never complained about that storyline. I don't know whether she ever did on the set, but there was never any sense that she had a problem with the storyline. Okay. She would have been told to suck it up in no uncertain terms anyway, because that was the character's life. What an actor or actress feels about something really should not come into it. It shouldn't come into it. You take the role and you know you are basically a gangster, you're a bad person. You cannot then say, well, I'll play this bad person, but I won't play that bad person. You know, and that's why you see, I mean, there is nothing sympathetic about Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs.
Yes.
Nothing. And yet you like him. You care about him. And when he says he's having a friend for dinner, you cheer, which you shouldn't do because you know he's going to eat them. But you take on a role, you play that role. So if she had complained, I would have said wanker. But she only complained apparently in Behind the Bars, which I think is, you know, more power to them for trying to do something. But it's a dreadful book. It's a truly terrible, terrible book. It's not indicative of Prisoner in any way, shape or form. And I know that Barry and cohorts worked really hard on it, but it's not something that I would, well, they never asked to interview me, but I wouldn't have done it anyway. But no, so I don't think anything about it because it didn't happen while she was shooting the series, and I don't care what she thought afterwards. I only care about what Ruth Ballinger thought. Yeah. I don't give a shit about what Lindy Davies thought.
Yeah.
Next one from Alf.
No, that's it. But do you think there is actors or actresses like that? Let's say, who can I use it as an example? Let's say Harvey Weinstein, they make a movie about him. Do you think there would be actors that would go, yeah, I'm not going to play that part of Harvey?
Of course there would be. Of course there would. Of course there would be. And I admire their integrity for doing that. But don't play it and then say, oh, I was really unhappy with that. I would never have played it if I'd known.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's just silly. That's just absolutely silly. And I know that most actors, even the ones who we class as only ever playing good guys, if they got a chance to play Harvey Weinstein and they felt they could do it,
yeah,
they would jump at the chance because they would find that part of Harvey Weinstein that hated himself for what he was, but couldn't help himself. So they would make that such a rich mine to explore as an actor. And that's what any actor who takes on a role should do. Say, well, this is not me. As Anthony Hopkins said, I'm playing a cannibal, for Christ's sake. You know, how do you play a cannibal and still make him human? And that's the challenge for great actors. So it's you know, really, sorry, Lindy, that's a wanky statement to make.
I read not long back an interview with Ian Smith, and he said can someone please give me a bad guy part? I don't want to be known as Harold anymore. I want to be a gangster. I want to be bad.
But he ended up bad, didn't he? He ended up being on the take in Prisoner, didn't he?
On Prisoner, yeah. But, you know, after Harold, he was Harold for so long.
Yeah, but he was Harold because there wasn't a lot. I mean, they knew they wanted Ian. And so with Harold, it was, well, Harold is Ian. He's, you know, back-faced, jolly, sort of.
And he is coming back,
you know, where he,
for the finale. The news is they're bringing Harold back. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, good. Because Ian went through a very, very sad loss of his wife. Maybe the year before last, when you live on the Gold Coast, time has no meaning. And they were everything to each other. And was a great, great loss. So I'm glad they're bringing him back for the finale. That's really, really good. That's great. But there are people who only get to play baddies.
Yeah.
And there are people who only get to play goodies.
Yeah.
You know, I am sure that Tom Hanks, deep in his heart, really would love to play an absolute bastard. But he is seen as the American hero. He's always a good guy. Whereas someone like one of my favorite actors, Robert Downey Jr., because he was a bad boy in real life, he's got to play bad boys. But I'm sure Tom Hanks would love to play an absolute ratbag. But people do find it shocking. I remember the first and only time I saw both Gregory Peck, you wouldn't know him, but Ken would remember him, and Henry Fonda play baddies in films, and I was shocked. I was actually shocked, and I was an adult. It was not like I was a kid. I thought, but that's Henry Fonda. He can't be a baddie. It's Henry Fonda. He's your quintessential good guy, you know. How can he be a baddie? So some people are only ever accepted as baddies, and some people are only ever accepted as goodies. But the really great actors are the actors that you can put in any role and they can play them.
Yeah.
Next question.
This one's from Mark Allen, who says, now this is a loaded question. You've often mentioned keeping a certain nameless actor in check by having a storyline that writes her character out in 3 scenes. Can you expand on that, or will you in future?
Well, look, anyone who hasn't guessed by now really needs to see a psychiatrist. Of course, it is Val. It is Val. And I was asked to keep her in check before I had even ever met her. And I think I'd only written about 3 scripts in the show. But the truth is, she was difficult. Now, she might claim that was her right to be difficult. And I would be the first, since I was extremely difficult, to applaud her for that. But she was difficult in ways. Look, you try not to bite the hand that feeds you. And you also, if you are given a role which makes you a star and a role which you can trade off for the next 45 years of your life, because you haven't done anything else that's terribly exciting since, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And she was a constant problem to the producers. Now, I wasn't privy to what those problems were, because I didn't have day-to-day contact with her. I have since surmised what those problems are, hearing stories from other people, and also being the receiving end of it on one site where she says, well, I don't really remember coraldrouyn because she was just this person that wrote the odd episode. Like, hello, I killed you. Do you remember that? Because I did. I killed her. But Ian Bradley, I'm surprised Ian Bradley didn't talk about this. Ian Bradley was the producer that said to me, I have to have something to keep her in check. Did he not talk about asking me to write her out? No. Well, he's obviously a lot more diplomatic than I am. Okay, Ian Bradley said to me, we are sick of her holding a gun to our head, or words to that effect, and I want you to write her out. And I said, what, is this going to be in an episode? He said, no, it's for me to keep in my desk drawer for the next time she comes in and demands something. And I said, well, okay, I can do it, but what kind of a story do you want? And he said, I want the least possible amount of scenes. And he said, if you can write her out in one scene, so much the better. So I wrote her out in 3 scenes. And we saw her in the first scene, and she was not feeling well. I think she'd had the kidney operation or whatever. And she said she was, in these scenes I wrote, in the first scene, she said, I got to go back to the cell for a minute. I'll see you in a minute. And that was the first scene, was her going back to the cell. The second scene, after a cutaway to something else, was a dining room scene where everything is being cleared up and B hasn't returned. And everyone's saying, where's B? And the third scene was Lizzie goes to the door of the cell, close up on Lizzie. Lizzie's eyes widen. Oh my God, B! Doors slamming shut. And then came back after the commercial break. She's in the hospital. She's on life support, blah, blah, blah. Turned out after the kidney operation, she was diabetic and didn't know it and had gone into a anaphylactic shock from her blood sugars and had died. But she was written out in one scene, and that was a scene where all she had to say was, I'm going back to the cell, I'll be back in a minute. That was how, and he kept that right up until she left in a brown manila envelope, A4 envelope, in his top drawer of his desk. And that was the person. So, and it was an order. It wasn't because I wanted to write her out. Later on, I said, well, you know, this is damn silly. We've transferred her, and if she's not coming back, is she ever coming back? Because there was, at one stage, her agent said she was willing to talk about coming back. And she had such a list of demands that Grundy said, no, she's never coming back. And I said, is that definite that she is never coming back? And they said, yeah, we don't want to have a bar of having her back. And so I said, well, then can I kill her? Because people are still expecting her to walk into that reception transferred back again. I said, and you know, if we really want to establish a new era and we really want to give Myra all the power, we've got to say B is dead. The Queen is dead, long live the Queen. And they okayed it. And so we killed her off screen, and it was at a time when the producer we had at that time, which now people will go scurrying to see who's got the producer credit, but I'm not going to name it. The producer we had at that time had not finished negotiating the contracts. And so because of what episode number it was, by the time they got to shoot it, we would have had no cast. And that's how the flashback episode came into being. It came into being because we had no actors who we could guarantee would still be in the show.
Wow.
When it came to shooting that episode. And so I think we had 3 or 4 left. And so what we were forced to do was hear of B's death and reminisce about old poor B, you know, which I think was episode 4/9 something. Yeah. So we went a whole year thinking that B may be transferred back. And when they said, no, she's never going to be, then I said, it's not fair to the viewers. It's not fair to people who keep expecting her to come back and watch week after week. And it's not fair to us because we're not getting, and it's not fair to Myra because we're not giving our audience a chance to change allegiance. She has to be dead for us to change allegiance. And of course, some people never did change allegiance. Some people were B. Smith fans till the death, and that's great. That's the power of how she played the character, and boy, she played that character really, really well. It's as if it was written for her. Yeah. Which of course it was, especially after the first few episodes. We knew this was going to be the star. What were her strengths? What were her weaknesses? And we wrote for those. And so, you know, it is as much B. Smith made Val Lehman as it is Val Lehman made B. Smith, but that is the person whom I was asked by Grundy's and by Ian Bradley as producer to write out way before she was actually written out.
Yeah. Now I know you and Val have your differences, but we do love Val here. She's been very supportive.
Look, I think she has every. The only thing I take issue with Val about is her acting as though the show was B. Smith and that she created B. Smith. That's the only thing I take issue with her about. I thought she played the character terrifically, but it was all there on the page for her to play, and it was tailored for her talents in every episode. So she should go down on her knees every single night and say, thank you, God, for giving me that chance to have that fame and celebrity status, which I can still, 40 years down the track, capitalize upon and even earn a living from. You see me doing conferences and no, you haven't.
When are you going to?
Pardon?
When are you going to an event? Prisoner event.
Who would want to come and see me, for Christ's sake?
Oh.
Most people don't even know who I am. That's why you get people saying, you know, I put up a picture of me and Val and lovely Annie Phelan, and some fan of the show wrote, who's that in the middle? Is that the girl who played Chrissy Latham? And I thought, no. And even when I told her who I was, she said, well, what did you do, Carol? So, you know.
Carol or Carol?
Carol.
Oh, Carol.
Carol, she called. Even after I said, no, it's me, Coraldrouyn, and I was a script producer and blah, blah. Oh, what did you do? Did you write? Most people think, oh, you wrote some episodes. Most people think that. That's all they think. And I mean, somebody on a prisoner site recently said, you know, the most prolific writer was Brian Williams, who only wrote 20-odd scripts. And I wrote 92 episodes. So 1/6, or I mean, if you count up to when I left, or just before episode 600, 1/6 of all the scripts for Prisoner, bearing that there were 2 episodes a week, I wrote, as well as created the stories and the characters. 1/6. And people still don't know who I am. So why would anybody want to go to an event with me? They will once they probably find out that I'm quite prepared to name names and things. I don't care. I'm not going to work in television again in my life, so it doesn't matter who I offend. It's the truth.
All right, moving along. John Walters said, I want to ask her, did she ever have any character favoritism? Was there one character that you just loved to death?
Look, I love Judy. I didn't create Judy. You know, she was there. She was beautifully played. I love Lizzie. I didn't create Lizzie. So the assumption is always going to be, you know, which of your characters did you use favoritism for? My favorite characters were actually not the ones that I created, but more the ones that made me want to do that for a living. So, yeah, Sheila and Judy were my favorites. I had favorite stories with favorite characters in them. Like, I feel absolutely blessed to have found Ros Gentle for the Brandy Laura character. And so once I knew how great she was going to be, those stories got bigger and bigger and bigger. And what was only supposed to be like a 3 or 4 week stint turned into a 12 or 20 week stint. And in that respect, I played favorites when I knew that characters really, really worked. Not actresses, because a lot of those actresses I had known before I started in television. I'd known them from theatre. So not the actresses. I never played favorites with actresses, but I did play favorites with characters.
Okay.
So, but mostly they were characters I didn't create.
Great. Okay. Ken?
Gary Logan, this is a comment, not a question. He says, one of my greatest writers. She sure has been part of all the successful Australian shows. I call her the Queen of the Writers.
Oh.
We don't make
Thank you,
these
sir.
up either. These are real questions.
Thank you. These are real people who wrote it. That is just that's lovely. I've always felt that the writers are the forgotten people, except now writers are starting to achieve star status, and we know who people like Aaron Sorkin are, and we know, oh my God, that's written by so-and-so. Yeah. But back when I was doing this, I mean, let's bear in mind, I was doing it right up until about 10 or 15 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, but the writer was never important and nobody knew the name. And I could not blame people for that, because I would always look at the name of the director on a movie and rarely remember the name of the writers.
Yeah. Rarely.
I can tell you who directed all the famous movies of the 40s, but unless it was Paddy Chayefsky or Joe Mankiewicz, I probably couldn't tell you who wrote it, because I never bothered to look at the writers' names. So that comment just means so much, and I'm deeply touched by that. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. M. Fripp said, hi, Coral. I know you have a deep affection for the Myra-Reb dynamic. Could you tell us a little about whether their mother/daughter vibe was something that was pre-planned?
It was, well, you know, because I've spoken about them, that I consider Annie Phelan and Janet Andrew-Walther superb actresses, absolutely superb actresses. And I had known them in their previous work, and I had known what they were capable of. But I saw in Annie, which a lot of other people really didn't see, but this was the real Annie. She was a great Earth Mother character. You know, she was a real, oh, come here. What are you getting upset about? Come on, you need a hug. And she was such a warm person. And I thought, as the top dog, she's going to have to be tough. But there should be someone who she feels a connection with. And I wanted that someone to be the best actress we had on hand at the time. And the best actress that we had on hand at the time who would fit the bill, because she was never going to gel with some of the more comic characters. The best actress we had on hand was Janet. And so I started with the dynamic, and it became a natural dynamic which took over. They fed off each other because they admired each other's work. They fed off each other so much that the dynamic grew bigger than I had intended it to be in the start. I'd always intended there to be a mother-daughter feel about it, but with a war between them, like the mother-daughter who love each other dearly, but fight crazily about everything, which was what I initially started off with, which was the dynamic between myself and my younger daughter, and still is to this day. We are both Librans and we're both so much alike, and we can spend 2 days together but no more before we and I wanted to have some of that, but it was their natural chemistry together which explored that dynamic even further. And M, for those of you that don't know, I met M first on another prisoner site. M is the most fantastic artist who does figurines as well as pastels and paintings of all prisoner characters. She is just absolutely phenomenal. So although I've never met her, hi Em, how are you, darling? I hope you are well. She's lovely.
Sure is. And that is it.
That's it.
We
How
did it.
Wonderful. We managed to keep it to just over 2 hours.
No, thank you so much. Now, I'm just a fan, so I'm nothing more than a fan. So I do want to thank you for everything you brought to Prisoner, the episodes, the characters you created. So I do thank you on behalf of all the fans, but not just Prisoner. I followed your website when it was out a long time ago, the dramaqueen.net, and always saw what you're up to. Yeah, it's not just Prisoner you're known for.
And did you watch Maggie Doyle get killed on Blue Heelers?
Yes, Blue Heelers, Pacific Drive, Arcade. I mean, you've done you're a big part of the Australian TV landscape. So
thank you so much, Matt. Thank you. And can I say that it has been, it's very hard to have all of this stuff in your head, and mostly it's been bottled up for all these years. So I should have said yes when Ken first asked me, which was the very early days, because then I would have been on before Val, and Val would have had a right of reply. So
well, you know, at the start, no one had any idea what this was going to be. And I mean, when I approached Ken, he was sort of like, I'm not sure what this is all going to be about, but we did the first one and then the second one, and
he wrote to me and he said, there's a young bloke I know and he's a Prisoner fan and he's thinking of doing a podcast, and I'm mulling over whether I'll be involved, and I wondered whether you'd like to be involved. And I said, Ken, it's 40 years ago. I've done 8 different shows since then. It's Prisoner. Put it to bed. It's gone. It's done. But then I started looking at, I mean, the one I post mainly on is one called All Things Prisoner, which only has a couple of thousand people on it. But he makes up little gameplays for us to play as prisoners. And so it's a little bit different. So I go and I post on there, and I don't have to answer questions much. I just play. I'm actually in Ruth Ballinger's cell, and I have minions among the other prisoners who come and bring me things. But then I thought, God, I'm so proud of this show and proud of what I did on it. Why would I not want to talk about it? And so when I dropped you a line and said, oh, by the way, yeah, I'm now interested in doing it, I didn't think I would talk to you for 8 hours over 3 bloody episodes. So I apologize to all the people who are waiting for their favorite characters who have been stuck with me for 3 episodes.
You're on for 3 weeks. You'll be up for 3 weeks. So.
Oh, really? But can I please say to the fans, thank you to them, and thank you to people like you, Matt, and the fans who didn't just embrace the show as, oh, these women are going to punch each other up and everything, who really took it seriously, who really explored it to its fullest, who really took the time to find out who the actresses were, who even took the time to find out who the writers were, who really explored the stories. And I know that there are many millions out there who weren't around when this show was created, who now are avid fans. And I can only hope that somewhere down the track, people will be saying in another 40 years, when my daughter is interviewed for something similar to this, I used to follow your mum's characters and stories on Prisoner, because they're universal stories. They're stories about humans, and they're stories about women. And now, 40 years later, we still rarely have shows where it is about women, and when it is, they are largely caricatures, 2-dimensional caricatures. If they're goodies, they don't have bad sides, they don't have faults. If they're baddies, they don't have good sides, they're incapable of empathy or compassion. And God, what we did in that 600 odd episodes to show women in all their vulnerability, all of their strengths, all of their weaknesses, all of their bad sides. I'm enormously proud to be a woman, and enormously proud that I had a few years in which to explore all that. It made a difference to my life, made me a different person. And I defy anyone who loves that show not to have said at some time in their life, but hang on in a minute, there's always another side to things. We've all learned that through Prisoner, if nothing else. There is always another side. What looks black may be grey, maybe pink. What looks white may be dirty, dirty grey. And it's important that we know that about human beings. We know that about ourselves as humanity. Of course, there are all black hat people. Donald Trump and Putin, for example. If I had the money, I'd put a hit out on both of them. But there are also, no doubt, 100% good people, though I've never met someone, and I think they were probably fairly boring if I did. But the great thing about the human race is there aren't limited stories to tell about people. There are unlimited stories to tell about people. So for all the would-be writers out there, for God's sake, tell them. Don't fall back on something you know or you've seen before. Tell them. Tell what you know about the world and make it the truth. If it's the truth, people are going to come to it. You know, it's a bit like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Yes.
If you tell your truth, people will be drawn to it. But it's got to be your truth. It can't be somebody else's. And for all, I was a very difficult person to work with at times. And for all, there are people who hate my storytelling, and that's their right. I always told my truth. I never ever fudged it. I never dishonored the gift. I think I told you that's my advice to all young writers: honor the gift. And I always feel proud that I never dishonored it. I never did a story I didn't believe in. I just refused to. And if I didn't believe in it, I twisted to a way where I could believe in it. And so I'm immensely grateful that people are still watching it. And I'm getting teary. Go away. Love you all. Thank you, Matt.
Hang on, I've got to wrap up. I've got to wrap up. Hang on, one more minute.
Oh, we're going to wrap up. Okay.
Anything you want to add, Ken, before we go?
Yes, I'm actually reading a biography for the second time round called A Difficult Woman, and it's the story of Lillian Hellman. Who,
yes, I've read that book. And I actually had found pages in that book where I thought, holy cow, that's me. That's me. But my biography is going to be called, if I ever do it, Dirty Laundry.
Dirty Laundry.
A Life in Soap. Dirty Laundry, A Life in Soap.
You have to bring out a book. Sorry, Ken, you're going to keep going.
Thank you so much, Coral. It's
My
been
pleasure.
Talking to you.
It really has been an absolute pleasure. Sorry it took such a lot of hours up, but I'm very old. There's a lot to
it's all been great stuff to listen to. So it's been amazing. So thank you. And that was episode 34, part 3 of Talking Prisoner. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Talking Prisoner. And please also share the videos where you can, and also like our Facebook.
Oh, we can actually see these at any time?
Yeah, they'll be up. Yeah, they're all up on the YouTube channel. Yes.
All right. So once they drop, you can access them anytime.
I'll send you a link as soon as they do. We're about 7 weeks ahead of schedule.
Brilliant.
Yes. And this episode of Talking Prisoner is also available across all the podcast platforms, including Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, the rest of them, and the talkingprisoner.com website. Thank you, Drouyn. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, everybody.